Welcome everyone to the Cup of Coffee podcast with me, your host Tom Dillon. This has been recorded live at our weekly online meeting and broadcast around the world. Today's topic is surfing the right wave in 2026 with Paul Lanfear. I sound a bit like a news broadcaster today. I don't know what's gone into me. Before we start, I'd just like to say, by way of a disclaimer, that today's a wonderful discussion, but that nothing said to constitutes financial advice, and you should always take professional advice before investing your hard-earned cash. There may be the odd unplanned swear word along the way as well. The format for today is that Paul will speak to us for a while, and then we'll be taking questions from the floor. With regards to Paul obtained a first-class law degree and started professional life as a barrister. He later qualified as a solicitor, practicing commercial, banking and finance litigation for 10 years, both in London and Leeds, for two of the world's leading law firms. Whenever I read these, I'm always reminded what mine would read like if I wrote it like that. Tom started by doing 6 hours a week at Halfords, where he didn't receive Employee of the Month even once, and left after a year, after receiving very little money and quite a few reprimands for poor behaviour. Anyway, back to Paul. That wasn't Paul, by the way. This is Paul. All this before leading a demanding qualification program for prospective barristers, starting a family, becoming an award-winning property entrepreneur, investor, developer, and multiple business owner. Now he's focused on consultancy, family, and surfing, not necessarily in that order. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me back on the podcast, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see everybody as well. Thank you for coming. It's exciting to be back. This is like becoming an annual pilgrimage for me, Tom, and it's quite good. It's like a little bit of a cathartic, reflective experience. I've been, yeah, thinking about.
Well, it's a year's a good portion of time, isn't it? Enough stuff can happen, mostly good stuff, and hopefully, and but you can kind of learn some stuff and then come back. And the feedback we always get from your podcast is always overwhelmingly positive. So it's why you keep getting invited back. And well, that and the fact I quite like you. I'm hopefully. Well, having said that, does that create a pressure to deliver? Probably at this point you're pretty relaxed about it. I imagine you didn't wake up this morning with a sense of dread, so I think you'd be all right.
Because I'm feeling slightly smug, Tom. So I'm going to get off. I'm going to get off to a blistering start because we haven't got long together. So, for those that heard this podcast last year, you'll be familiar with this. For those that didn't, let me just clue you in. So I every year I come up with some predictions, and I gave these to you guys ahead of when I normally release them, just for a bit of Tom obviously, like, put me in a headlock and forced me to do it or something like that, because I would never normally release my predictions. But to get us out of the gate, I'm going to feed back on my predictions. Okay, so on the podcast for last year, I said there were three asset classes that I thought were going to outperform. So I won't ask you if you can remember them. So I picked my three asset classes, and there's been some real surprises. So these are the scores on the doors, okay? So my least performing asset class was the individual stock of Coinbase. Year to date, minus 12%. Not the best. However, the other asset class I recommend, I did not make a recommendation, not financial advice, that I suggested we have a look at was the Nasdaq. That's up 10%. That's not bad, is it? 10% is pretty good. And then for those that remember, the final one was a bit of a wild card, which was silver. So silver is up 126% this year. And I said, for a bit of fun, because it's only a little bit of fun, you construct this in your ISA and decide put them in order, and then build a portfolio of 70, 20, 10. So if, interestingly, you were very risk adverse and you picked the least risky by just kind of objective standards, you went, well, I'll put silver in, because it's a precious metal. They don't tend to do very much. They tend to go sideways. You would have had the best performing portfolio. So look, there's lessons in there. I don't not fully know what the lesson is, but there is a lesson in there. I've come up with my top three, but that's for another occasion. So I thought I'd get that out of the way. Now, for those that don't know me, I'll do a very quick introduction because we haven't got very long together, and I want to get onto the main piece. So, yes, I wanted to be a rock star, genuinely a rock star. So I wanted to be in Metallica, and as I always say, the only thing between me and being the guitarist in Metallica was a complete absence of any musical ability. So I had to go and come up with plan B. So for various reasons, I became a lawyer. and practiced all around the world, done some very interesting stuff, met some very interesting people. I would say when I left the profession, it was no great loss to the profession. So what I mean by that is, I worked with genuine geniuses, men and women who were unbelievable. And I was very grateful to kind of be on their coattails and work with them and that kind of thing. Yes. Have had many. One of the themes of today you know, is a question for you, which is looking at this new year, what's the necessary step for you? Is it a reset, or is it a reinvention, or is it a refinement? So, like, where are you in your lives? And we might circle back to that in the Q&A. I've had many resets in my life, some of them pretty hard, hard resets. When you turn your phone off, it goes black, you blank, and you turn it back on. Not least of which was one of my best friend in property who would have been at this meeting, a long time ago. He unfortunately left us, and that has I'm unapologetic about the way that has reshaped my life. Like I have a very different perspective on life after that happened. Um, and property wise, at a peak with 236 tenants. For the love of God, never get yourself 236 tenants. Um, and I've done lots of interesting things as well. I've gone very deep into property, and now I've gone very wide into investment, and I invest in a range of asset classes. Um, Largely because I find it interesting. I find it really mentally stimulating. I really like spending years researching asset classes before I invest in them, and then I usually take a reasonably significant investment in things when I understand that they work for us. So that's by way of background. Today, I wanted to start off by kind of reflecting on the year that's 2025. And I thought perhaps we can all do it together and we can pick some of it up in the Q&A for those that are live. Um, is that what are the lessons that we've learned in 2025? One of my first mentors, who was really an awesome mentor, he was I would describe him as robust. Like I'm quite nurturing as a mentor. I'm quite supportive. I'm kind of with you on the journey. My first mentor was not that. He was very, very tough, and he was particularly tough on me. I have to felt like he was particularly tough on me, which I needed at the time. And uh, he lost a lot of money in a property transaction. This was well before I was in property, in a Scandinavian country. And he said the lesson that he learned from that is you either learn the lesson or you're going to repeat the same mistake year on year. So the question is, are we willing to learn the lessons? So I think let's reflect on lessons we may have learned this year. And I have a love of surfing. So my love of surfing came from um, the loss of my best friend, and the way that I kind of emerged out of that was I took up surfing, fell back in love with nature, and that was kind of the part of the process for me. And I have learned many lessons from surfing this year, which I'm going to share with you. We'll try and get through five, and we'll see how we go. So, the first lesson I have learned this year from surfing is get out of the impact zone. So, if you're looking at surfers surfing, you'll see that there is the white water where the waves are breaking in. And sometimes these can be this can be a very gentle. There's a wave in Hawaii called the Waikiki wave. It's a very soft, gentle wave that breaks, but often you get really heavy waves. And surfers they want to ride the face of the wave, so they either want to go left or they want to go right. What is a nightmare for surfers is a wave which closes out. So a wave that closes out is a wave that falls all at the same time. And a particularly bad place to be when waves are closing out is in the impact zone. So it's where the wave is coming in. Um, and if you're, an 8-year-old child and you're in waist deep water and there's a lifeguard, you will have the time of your life. It will be the funniest thing you've ever done. You'll absolutely love it. If you are a 50-year-old man who took up surfing later in life, Uh, it is less of a funny experience, and it can be it can be quite. It focuses the mind. Let's put it on that. Because on a more serious note, you will only survive in the impact zone for a certain period of time before you become exhausted. So the lesson is if you find yourself in life, business, or property in the impact zone, you have to get out of it. And you have to get out of it as quickly as possible. So an example I would give in property before we come to the here and now is imagine, you've been growing your portfolio, you're doing lots of refurbishments, and because you're doing lots of refurbishments and stuff like that, you've allowed yourself to go into negative cash flow. Happens all the time, nothing to worry about. But the lesson is if you find yourself in that position, you need to push through and get through that stage as quickly as possible, which means going for growth. Often a challenge with property portfolios is they don't grow enough, so they're not actually making enough money to survive on, or they overextend and they starve themselves of cash. In either situation, it's awful. So you need to get out of the impact zone. I would say we're in an impact zone as an industry right now. So you look at the Renters' Rights Act that's now been passed and it's coming in. It's going to take effect from I think the 1st of May next year. Um, you look at the EPC changes. And this is stuff we need to think about if we wish to stay in the industry. And I say that very intentionally. One answer is is just sell and exit, and there's no harm in that, and there's no disrespect in that. Um, I think people make a big deal about under, understandably, portfolio landlords selling. I know a lot of portfolio landlords who are selling. Why are they selling? Because they've made life-changing amounts of money since the 90s, and they just want to have a quiet life and they realize that maybe their kids don't want to manage the properties when they move on, so they don't really want to burden them with them. So a lot of portfolio landlords are selling up because it is convenient to do it. Um, but obviously other landlords are selling up because they don't like the direction of travel. Kudos to them. Like what a brilliant decision. Because what that allows that allows the natural, I'm actually pretty free market. That allows the natural distribution of assets. That means, the rising stars can buy whole portfolios right now. I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a mortgage broker. I'll tell you who he is. James Rogers of Property and Popdoms. He's seeing loads of portfolios come across his desk. Fantastic. For the rising stars, there's an opportunity to acquire a handful of properties all in one go. Brilliant. Really speeds up the process. So, lesson number one, if we are in the impact zone, we need to get out of it, whether that's by selling up or whether that's adjusting to the marketplace. Our perspective, because I do not think the world is coming to an end, is we're locking in for another decade. We're doing all the EPC stuff for for a number of reasons. We're doing the EPC stuff and refinancing, locking in. We're here for another decade. Maybe that's the right decision for us. Maybe it's not for you. Decisions to be made. The second thing is, the second lesson is ride the rip. Okay? Ride the rip. So if you look at, and it would be good to know this, if you look at surf, there's the place where there's the breaking waves, and then there are these interesting places where the waves are not breaking. Now, there might be various reasons for that. One of the reasons is that it's likely to be a rip. So the water is going back out to sea through a deep channel. Some of these are permanent, let's say next to a pier or some rocks. Some of them are temporary, where a sandbank is split in two, and the force of the water is carving a channel. Um, Sometimes we think of, well, a rip is a bad thing for most people. You're getting swept out to sea on what feels like a conveyor belt is a bad thing. And we see terrible things happen. Sandbanks collapse, kids get dragged out to sea. Thank God we have fantastic lifeguards. Um, but a rip is also an opportunity. So I got caught in a rip a, a while back now, and I'm happy to say it was. I'm happy to admit I've got sufficiently contained ego to say that I was absolutely terrified, and you really get to see who you are, and this is embarrassing to admit, but I am. Do you know the biggest hurdle I was dealing with is I didn't want to ask for help because of pride, because of embarrassment, you know, and that is like such an embarrassing thing to admit. But I managed to get myself out of this rip eventually, and I phoned my mentor the sort of the next day, and I said to him, "Look, this happened to me yesterday, and it's really shaken me up. It's really freaked me out." And he said, "No worries. What are you doing tomorrow?" I said, "Oh, I'm fine. I can come and see you tomorrow." He goes, "Great. I'll meet you here at this time." And I thought, well, that's weird. It's an odd spot to meet, and it's a very odd time to meet, and the tide is exactly the wrong kind of tide that we would need in that spot. So I was like, this makes no sense. Anyway, let's go. So he took me to this spot. He we stood on these rocks. I mean, that's a bad sign to start off with. Start standing on rocks, and he said, right, tell me what you see. And I said, well, I can see this what looks to be pretty terrifying rip going out between the rocks. And he said, great, put your wetsuit on. We're going in. And I mean, he's like a pro surfer, right? He's been surfing all of his life, and he took me through this rip, and it was it was fine because I was with him and I trust him with my life. There's no doubt about that. But obviously I was anxious as well. Um, but we paddled out through the rip, and I had the sensation, really for the first time, of gliding out with the motion of the rip pushing us out to sea. And then at the appropriate point, he was like, "Okay, we need to now get out the rip. So we now to don't paddle against the rip, but go at a right angle, and eventually you'll come out of it." And we did. Like magically, we came out of the rip, paddled out, caught some waves. Best day of my life. So sometimes adversity looks awful and bad, but sometimes, it's the best thing that can happen to us. So now I will use the rips to get out back, which is where the waves are breaking, as efficiently as possible. I suppose the footnote to that is always have a mentor or always have somebody that you're working with to kind of facilitate that process. Um, Lesson number three, and I've got an eye on the time as well. Um, in surfing, there is this concept of flow, and I'm a great believer in flow, where everything feels effortless. But to get to flow, you need effort. And what we have to decide in every moment is this a moment of flow or is this a moment of effort? And in the context of surfing, um, the moment of effort is the paddle out. So to get to where you want to, you're gonna have to paddle out. And the truth is, you have to paddle harder than you want for longer than you want, and you often have to paddle to the point of exhaustion, and it's really quite unpleasant at times. But if you don't paddle out hard enough and quickly enough, the whole task gets harder and harder and harder because the way you'll start getting sets coming in, which are the waves hitting you, you're pushing you back. So know where you are in your journey right now, and is this a moment for flow? Everything is in place and it's time to surf the wave? Or are you in effort where you need to be paddling hard and maybe, paddling hard for 12 weeks or maybe more before you get an effort to flow? Um, Tom came to my retreat this year. Very thrilled to have Tom there. Unfortunately, he couldn't make the mountain stage, but we start off at the mountain stage, and we select a mountain that is perfectly viable to do if you've got an average or above level of fitness. But but there are stages of the mountain stage that are highly demanding. We have trained mountain guide. It's highly demanding. There's some scrambly bits. You need to dig deep, and you need to kind of make that effort. So that's an example, I think, of like a non-surfing example of what the difference between effort. I suppose I'll segue to Tom here, and I suppose ask a bigger question because I'm a great believer in retreats. what was your experience of the retreat, and what did you get out of going on a retreat?
First of all, it's probably a good idea to start by saying I hate retreats. I think
Good.
that's the context of it. I think they're for softies and liberals and and the French. We love the French, of course, but so that's the context. And having said that, I have to sort of annoyingly announce, a bit like you were ashamed, maybe the wrong word, it's too strong, but you weren't delighted with yourself that you had to admit that you had, a bit of pride and whatnot in the situation you were talking about. Well, likewise, it fills me with nothing but sadness to have to admit that the retreat, Paul's retreat, was the best thing I've done this year by some distance.
Mm. I'll have that. I'll have that.
Mm.
That's a good end use feedback. Um, and it's, that leads me on, I suppose, to my next point, which is find community. And in surfing, there is access to a community. You just have to find where you fit in that community and which community that is. Because we're not meant to go alone. Like I use surfing to decompress from screen time and you know the pressures of all the things that we do in life. So actually, I really enjoy surfing on my own. The truth is, the best surfing is done with other people. It's just a different experience. It's also a hell of a lot safer, and you can also take a lot more risk because you've got the hive mind of all the people are out there reading the waves and all the rest of it. So, and I am an introvert, so actually, um, a lesson that I have learned is you've got to find community, and whether it's the community, the fantastic community that you guys here have with Tom, whether it's with me, whether it's with anybody else, you have to find community. And then I suppose the punchy lesson within that for this year is also show up. And I would say this year has been the year where, as a world, um, we I think have lowered our standards and maybe become a little bit flaky in that respect. And I think that showing up is really, really important. I shall let you into a little secret. When I host my breakfast meetings, I will inevitably, oh yeah, he's got the book, very good. Um, when I host my breakfast meetings, I'll tell you the messages that I get in private afterwards. I will get two or three messages from people who said, Paul, I didn't want to come and I came and I had the best experience and I feel so much better that I came. And I always reply back saying, I know, because this is what happens. And I know you don't want to come because when you're in a bit of a difficult space, you don't want to show up. So I mean this with heart and I mean it with love as well. Is show up, show up. I think don't bail, don't cancel, don't not come, show up. Because it's always better to show up, even if you don't feel like it. And often it's the best thing you can do. And then I am going to bring things to a bit of a conclusion with my final lesson, which is enjoy the moment. So, there's a lot going on when you're on a surfboard, and and sometimes I realize that I'm paddling around, I'm thrashing about, and all the rest of it. And the sun is rising. There's no one else around. I'm in the most beautiful place. I'm in my happy place. So I will just stop and I will just sit on my board and look out to sea and calm my breathing down and just take in the moment. And it for me it is like it is a spiritual experience. And I allow that time to take that moment. And this is not this on the face of it will sound like quite a sad thing to share, but in my little world, my little community, I've lost two good friends this year. Lost Ray, he was 49. I've lost Ash, he was 51. Just guys who rock up to meetings like this, and they're funny, everybody likes them, and their time has been called. And so that is a yes, it is very sad. And as a community, we were able to do some stuff for their kids this year, which was brilliant. But after the sadness, there is the message, isn't there? That enjoy the moment, like soak in the beautiful moment, whatever that might be. Um, I'm going to begin to kind of bring it to a bit of a conclusion and open it to like Q&A. I suppose something that I would sort of plant at this moment is those are my reflections on 2025. I would recommend everybody have a reflective moment on 2025. Like, what was the lessons that you were meant to learn? And then as we go into 2026, have a plan. Warren Buffett, an idiot, an idiot with a plan will be a genius without one. Have a plan. And I can help you with that plan. So every year I host a charity event. This year it's on Friday, the 9th of January. Starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll put a link in the show notes. And I 2 hours, give me 2 hours, I'll give you a one-page business plan. I'll also make a few predictions. Let's see if they come in. Let's see if I get another silver one right. So have a plan. That would be my recommendation. Tom, have we got any questions from the group?
Might do, might not. Before we get on to those, just want to say thanks very much for you sharing there. That was genuinely inspirational as usual. Just to where to begin? Where to begin? That's my first issue. Show up, especially to Paul's seminar. That's good. What do people do if they want to go to that? If they're listening or if they're here live?
So I to find it be really straightforward. If you go and find me on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, they're the easiest ones to interact with. Probably you'll see a man with a beard, blue branding, probably a surfing thing, and if you'll find a post relating to the Discovery Day. Look in the comments; there'll be a link there. We'll put it in the show notes as well. I'll put it, for the people here. I'll put it in the group chat if I can.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, click on that link, get booked on. 100% of the proceeds go to a really amazing charity called Flourishing Families. They just do the most extraordinary stuff with the most disadvantaged people in Leeds, and they do amazing work. So they get all the money, and they get it in the new year when charities are beginning to struggle a little bit.
Yeah. So, I'll I've got my own questions, but so I'll make sure we get through as many as other people's as we can, because it's often where the value is, rather than my tedious ramblings. We'll go straight to a question that's coming from Nick. So his name's not Nick, it's Adam. But anyway, Adam says, I've been looking to try to get back to seminars and meetings. I used to get loads from them, but it tapered off when I had the first child. I feel like it's time to get back to them after going to a negotiation seminar with Victoria Verdi other month. So what's I guess he didn't really ask this, but what are your thoughts on Paul's got a daughter, so how do you think you manage it? I guess it's just a balance thing, isn't it? And a priorities thing.
Well, what's to define what the problem is? What not? Yeah, what's the challenge around attending the events?
Adam, why don't you tell him rather than me put words in your mouth?
If you could distill it down into a sentence, and we can afford to be honest with each other, what would it be?
I don't think it's so much of a question. It was just more of a making a comment in the chat, really. I used to really enjoy the seminars. I went to, there was some down London there was a guy group called Tarot. I went a few down there. I enjoyed that, as you say, herd mentality.
Yeah.
Since I had the baby, I've always wanted to spend time with her and not miss the development key stages. But now she's 1.5, I feel I can have, a day or two away from her here and there. So, I'd like to get back to that. So, like I say, it's more of a comment than a question.
No, I think no, there is a question there. So, I mean, firstly, you have clearly prioritized the right thing. I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and she came back from uni last night. I'm going to go Christmas tree shopping in about 20 minutes. And it's the best thing in the world. And I can tell you, I don't want to sound like, too much of an old geezer, but it goes so quickly. So just as you are clearly doing, Adam, that is the important shit, you know. So you're focusing on the real deal. You're focusing on the important stuff. And in terms of events, so again, being honest, I've been to a series of events this year, and some of them have left me really flat. And I think it's useful to have that self-awareness and to say, well, that didn't work. So why didn't that event work? Now, look, it might be that it's the wrong event, but it also might have been the way that I set it up. That I was stressed when I was traveling there. I was overcommitted. Whereas I've attended other events and, booked myself into like, 5-star hotel and a spa and, and for some reason I had a great time. So uh, it's also like how am I doing it? How am I showing up? How are the logistics working? And look, sometimes it's not for us. Um, and I think the more in tune you become to yourself, particularly if you're sensitive, you are sensitive, or you have a certain degree of empathy. Some rooms you don't want to be in. There's some rooms that you get a bad feeling, turn around, walk out. you know, that's my advice. Tom, questions?
Lovely stuff. I wanted to not let you off the hook too much with these 5 wonderful things that you mentioned, or 5 very important things. Yeah, so looking at number 1, forgive me if I get the names of them wrong, we said get out of the impact zone. The one thing that came to my mind with that straight away was the Renters Reform Bill, which you then referenced as part of that. Clearly there's other impact zones, the wider industry stuff, but just looking at that one as an example. So we're in an impact zone, maybe that's coming in, maybe other stuff's coming in. How should people make the decision whether it's time to bail? I think I read somewhere that net 2024, this is before that stuff was all decided, I think we lost 200,000 landlords from the industry. Probably is, I don't know, I don't know, I didn't speak to all of them, but as a combination of factors. But I would imagine it feels a little bit like the walls are closing in, I think, for landlords, or certainly getting more challenging market conditions. Brackets, the walls are closing in. So how do people decide what's right for them? Is this a case of looking at the bank account, seeing what's in there?
So we have a mantra in the office, which is move towards the problem. Move towards the problem. So if you've got a problematic house, it's tempting to kind of put it to the back burner and not dwell on it. But in our experience, that never works. You actually need to move towards the problem, focus on the problem. So the best thing you can do is actually read the legislation and look at what the entry level fines are for the breaches and decide whether you have the stomach for that. Obviously, property is reasonably illiquid. It takes time to sell. And I would say you need a destination for that capital as well, because obviously we live in a perpetually inflationary environment. Like, don't worry about what CPI says. Look at what your spending habits are and look how expensive things are. Everything I want to buy goes up by 10% every year. So my personal inflation rate is 10% a year. So I have to be keeping at least in pace with that. And there has to be a destination for that capital as well. Returns in the bank. Happily, the insurance limit has now gone up to, I think, 120,000. That's not bad. You can split it between different banks, I suppose. But those returns are going to diminish over time because inflation is always going to beat what they give you in the bank, always, all through time. So you need to think about what the destination is and what kind of stomach you have for it. So, and there are many interesting things. I mean, in my portfolio, we have a whole range of things. But if I pick on one of them, options trading, for example. But do people lose money trading options? Yes, they do. I've got really good friends who, in April, when Trump announced the tariffs, were in what are called LEAPs, long expiry anticipated securities. So they were giving them somewhere between 3 and 5 times leverage, and they had set certain stop losses, and they were absolutely wiped out. So they lost 100% of their capital that they had deployed into that part of their portfolio because the leverage operated against them. So the grass is always greener, isn't it? But you have to decide what you have a kind of a stomach for, what you're likely to enjoy, what suits you.
Yeah.
Those would be my thoughts on that.
Good, excellent stuff. Really useful. Riding the rip. I'd love to just spend the next 20 minutes talking about that one, but I want to try and get a little bit on each one. So, riding the rip. That sounds, as you said, stand on the rocks. I like that. Stand on the rocks. This seems bad to start with. Never stand on the damn rocks. rough times might be ahead, or people might be having rough times right now listening to this. Okay, so we stood on the rocks. But what you did, albeit with your mentor, maybe that's the key point here, is you then went out and rode the waves and rode the rip first of all to get out there. So I suppose two questions. One is, how do I know when I'm facing the rip? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. And then two is, because it's all going to be terrible. And then two is, remind me again, why am I riding this rip? And how do I know when to get out?
So, the truth is, the future is uncertain, and the one thing that does not work is inactivity. So, in nature, there's only two modes, isn't there? There's growth or there's atrophy. And you have to decide which like Mother Nature never stands still, and nor does life, and nor do human beings. We are living in a very exciting time to be alive. These final parts of the 2020s are going to be absolutely astonishing. They're going to be really remarkable. We're in what's called the fourth turning. So, because it's been roughly 80 years since the end of the Second World War, we've forgotten what the horrors of war mean. We're in a we have very high levels of chaos, very low levels of order. So the 2020 is going to be very, very interesting. And I'm not a doom and gloomer, but the word for 2026 is going to be volatility. And volatility is often perceived as a bad thing, but in reality, volatility is where opportunity is. Every single investor on the planet secretly wants volatility because they want whatever they own to go up in value very, very quickly. Which is not always a good thing. You look at silver now. My recommendation from not my recommendation, my humble suggestion with not giving financial advice from last year. I'm horrified by that. I'm horrified that's up by 126% because I've owned it since 2018. The fact that influencers are talking about it now makes me want to sell everything because that's a bad sign. It's a bad sign that anything goes up too quickly because it will often point towards a breakage in a marketplace that you can't see because capital is coming from somewhere and it's coming in volume, which means where is it going? Where is it leaving from? What do people know that I don't know as a market participant? So I think the reality is, Tom, like we're always facing the rip. Next year is going to be a really significant rip. So it's a question of riding the rip as best we can. And I think there's going to be fantastic opportunity in it. We often think when we think about change and volatility as bad, but what if the other side of it, the 2030s, are absolutely amazing? What if they're the best time in living history? And we just need to get there. And full disclosure, that is how I feel about it. That's how I feel about it as a father, as a husband, as an investor. I think the 2030s are going to be amazing. I'll give you a quick example. I am going to shut up in a minute, Tom, but I'll give you a quick example of this, right? So I got called. So my mum called me in the middle of the night. Paul, I think your dad's going to die. I've called the ambulance. They're on his way. He can't breathe. He's kind of unresponsive. I think this is it. And so 4 o'clock in the morning, got up. I lived quite a long way from them. Drove overnight to get there. By the time I got into the hospital to see my dad, he was able to talk. He was reasonably coherent. He wasn't like fully there, but he was reasonably coherent. And then by the time they'd finished all the all the post checks they have to do, he physically walked out of the hospital. So this is a guy who, in the middle of the night, that was gone. And they basically brought him back to life. And he basically walked out of a hospital. I mean, he wasn't jumping, he wasn't like, skipping out of hospital, but, it was with my assistance. He was on his own 2 feet. Didn't put him in a wheelchair because that's not my dad's style. He's a stubborn. So he walks out, and I can get him into a vehicle. So that's where we are here, 2025. Imagine where we're going to be in the mid 2030s. Cure for cancer, cure for lung disease. Who knows?
Yeah, the medical stuff's very exciting, isn't it?
Mhm.
I say this as someone who gets sick a lot. I'm very excited to be able to be fixed more than I currently am. Lovely stuff. Let's get. I'll flip flop a little bit. Listener's question in no particular order. Andrea asks, "What platform do you use to invest in silver and gold?" And I like this one. Which is better, a coach or a mentor?
Um, I've got opinions of that on that. I'm going to probably offend a lot of people in the process of giving that opinion, so I'll give that later on. Just so, um, so in terms of gold and silver, I think clearly not financial advice, but
No.
also anything that's gone up 100%. Um, just on the balance of probabilities is going to have a violent correction. And what I mean by that is at least 20, 30%, 50%. So anybody buying now is going to have to ride that particular roller coaster. And the market is euphoric. And euphoria is a sell indicator, which is why I'm actually reasonably positive about property for next year because sentiment is so rubbish. We're nowhere near euphoria. I struggle to see how we could have a violent correction. I don't. I think we're going to have a kind of correction, but it's not going to be. It's not going to be of the kind that people think it will be. Um, so there's lots of different opportunities to get price exposure to get exposure to gold and silver. It depends on your view. Okay, so if you think the world is coming to an end and you're buying it in preparation for the zombie apocalypse, and it may sound like I'm being flippant and mocking. I'm not. Like you might be right, okay? So if you think that's the base case, you then need to do like a mental calculation of if it is the end of the world and it is the zombie apocalypse, what are you actually going to need, and is it gold and silver? I don't know the answer to that. It might be other things in reality. And I'm not being flippant because actually, you know, yeah, I'm not being flippant.
Water might be handy, might it?
Yeah, but all kinds of things like, being healthy, having a good network,
Being able to run a long way from zombies.
well, no, but like living in a really safe jurisdiction. We
Yeah.
I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but you know, we have where the city I live in, not so long ago they were setting fire to the buses in a particular location. Honestly, hand on heart, I'd say if you live in that location, you probably want to move because that's not going to get better because that shows that there is a problem in that area. There's a lack, anyway. So gold and silver exposure. It depends how you want to play it. So you could go to the Royal Mint and you could buy gold and silver coins and you could have that exposure. You need to think about storage. You need to get a safe in your house. What you do, bury them in the garden potentially, or you need to get external storage. So there is a risk involved with that. So, you don't want to store it at your house. That's the truth of it. So then you think, well, how else do I play it? So then you can buy an ETF. So in an ISA or any wrapper that we have available to us as investors, you can buy them as an ETF. You'll want to make sure it's a physically backed ETF. You want to make sure it's not leveraged because the leverage will kill you. And you want to make sure it's a responsible, well-recognized provider. I'm not going to endorse any of them. That's the way you can do it. If you are insane and you like losing money, you can trade contracts for difference on the trading platforms, so CFDs. Equally, you've got the other version, which is spread betting. Again, only for the completely insane. So the usual health warning is 90% of investors lose 90% of their money in the first 90 days on this platform. They are not lying to you when they give you that health warning. The FCA have told them to put that there for some reason. So there is that. More out on the curve stuff is you could buy gold and silver mining companies. You could buy an ETF that contains them. And then you've got the more advanced strategies, which is the stuff that I do, which is sell puts and calls as an options trading strategy. So you have derivative exposure, so you don't actually have the asset. Um, it costs a lot of, the leading program on that now costs the best part of £20,000 to do. I would say you need a minimum of £200,000 for it to be worthwhile. So those would be my thoughts on that.
Cool. Coach versus mentor, but if we try and keep everything to about 2 sentences, then we've got a
Yeah,
chance to get
so
through.
so I I, I struggle with both of those words now. So this is going to turn to a bit of therapy, Tom. I'll try and get it done in 60 seconds. I don't like the word mentor anymore because um, there's been such poor mentoring in particularly in the property industry. So I self-identify as a consultant, and the reason I self-identify as a consultant is if I know the answer, and I will get in the trenches with you and solve it with you, and I will also introduce you to people in my network who can do that. Um, I've gone off the term mentor. I I also personally don't love coaching um, unless it's done at a very, very high level. Because what is annoying for me personally as a human being is, I want that Tony Robbins thing of decades into days. I want to say to somebody, I've got this problem. I need you to help me fix it. That's why I'm here. The answer I don't want is, well, how do you feel about that? And, where do you see the solution is that? No, mate. I've got this problem. I am paying for you to help me solve
Yeah,
this problem, and I want to solve it in the next 12 months.
yeah.
I don't want an esoteric exercise. I want the solution.
Yeah.
And so
The
that's just
feds are
me.
knocking on the door here.
Yeah, but that's just me. And but saying that, there are some world-class coaches, and we should seek them out.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, we'll do one from me. Then we might run just a couple of minutes over, so people who need to go, they can go. Of course, you're not being held here against your will. I wanted to ask about the. Well, I'll do it in this order because then I can wrap it up. So, Graham asks to change tack a little bit, which is always the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Are you involved in commercial property or know someone who is? Not looking at retail with flats, more along the lines of industrial. Industrial
Okay.
property?
So we did look at commercial property, and we did a very, very expensive mastermind, which I won't identify because actually it wasn't brilliant. And my sentiments about what I learned on that mastermind, and this is just a personal observation for us and not a reflection of the marketplace, is that it wasn't really a great fit for what we wanted to do. A lot of
Yeah.
the problems that we were trying to get away from were showing up in the commercial property space.
Mm.
So we weren't, the problems we were trying to solve weren't solved by that. So that wasn't a route that we ultimately went down. But I know people who have got industrial property again, there's always problems with that, but they make a great living. That's not an area I can give a recommendation for. It's just because it's not simply a space that I'm in.
No, fair enough. You mentioned point four was the fourth thing you talked about was finding community, and that surfing and lots of other things is much safer with more people. You asked me earlier, and I gave a true answer, which was that the retreat was the best thing I've done this year, but I didn't really put any. That was all I said. And so to put a couple of sentences of meat on those bones is and talk about that a little tiny bit was because the reason I found it so valuable was, first of all, I wasn't expecting to. That was good. But I think it was you and the team, the people there, really facilitated getting to a deeper level with people quickly. I read separately from the retreat that an excellent question to ask people. There's all kinds of work on this, but if you ask vulnerable type questions, then you get to a deep level of relationship with people quicker. So a classic one would be ask someone. I tried this yesterday at the bar, funnily enough, after futsal. Was when was the last time you cried in front of someone else? And there's lots of other ones out there. Now I'm pleased to say at no point did anyone on Paul's retreat ask me that, but we did lots of other things that kind of reminded me of that, and that it helped to facilitate. And also being with like-minded people who were interested in property, but also interested in lots of other things, really means that I've felt I've met some really good people there I now consider friends in a very short period of time. This all feels like Paul set me up to advertise his retreat, which he hasn't, for the record. I'm saying this off my own bat. And if you get a chance to go to his retreat next year, well, I imagine it'll be fully booked, but if you haven't been lucky enough to see an advert for it, I'd strongly suggest if you can go that you do. But that said, I wanted to all prelim to a question really, which is it says finding community is a key thing. Some people turn to the meeting or listen to the podcast, obviously, and so watching this on YouTube. So they've already found some community, but Paul said it also helps people to show up, which is a critical thing. But why do you think that's difficult, or why do you think that's important? it sounds like a stupid question, but why should people do that?
Why do I think community is important?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when COVID happened, I did a lot of research about, when COVID first happened, obviously it looked initially like it was going to be the worst thing that had ever happened to humanity. I mean, it looked
Mm.
really, really horrendous as it was traveling around the world. And because we had a little bit of time on our hands, I did some research into what actually happens when there is a crisis. And one of the things I learned about what happens in a genuine crisis is that the same event can happen to a different community or in different parts of the world, and the outcomes are absolutely unrecognizable. So, for example, you can have a natural disaster that happens in one community and a certain set of outcomes happen, and pretty much exactly the same natural disaster happens in another, and the outcomes are completely different. So it could be that in the first community, um, the natural disaster happens, the people come out, they rescue strangers, and they give them resources, and they take really good care of them, and it's an experience of coming together and being of service.
Mm.
And then you can have exactly the same natural disaster, and within days, people are looting and trying to kill each other. And they give some real live examples of this. And the difference between those two things is a sense of community. It's a sense of being, of having a place and belonging, which is very, very natural. We really should be used to living in villages and tribes and communities of about 100 people that we know pretty well. What we're not designed for is staring at a 6-inch screen, seeing the worst of humanity played out, like it's that distilled down to the worst of humanity every single day. That's very, very unnatural. We're not, as a species, designed for that. So community is actually at the very heart of everything. If you want to thrive, you need to find a community and you need to be part of it and you need to show up to that community. Um, if I and then there's a choice as to how you show up as well. So I was speaking to some people yesterday, and a very common reflection that people have when they look back at this year is I didn't spend enough time with my friends. That you may not feel that, but that I can tell you, 80% of people I speak to, that's the
Mm.
reflection they have. I didn't have enough fun with my friends, you know? And I suppose the answer to that is, well, how do you show up in terms of if that is true for you, then you need to be the person who galvanized the troops. And I'm not throwing men under the bus here, but I am. Okay? Guys particularly are bad at this, I would say. I do think women are better. So it's like you need to take responsibility for gathering the troops and just try and doing it once. And I have this reputation in my friendship group where I've got this WhatsApp group, we're all in it, and somebody will organize an event, and it always starts with the first sentence. Organizing this event, these are the details, this is how much it will cost. Let us know you're on board. Lamf, we know you're in. Is anybody else in? So it's always like, we know Paul's in. Who else is in? And I'm really proud of that now. I'm proud that I have the reputation amongst my friends group of, if they ask me to do something, I don't ask the details of it. I say yes, and then I make it happen. So that's an example of like being part of your community. Like, you be the person who says yes.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
be the person as well who the night before absolutely doesn't want to go and still goes. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
you're stressed, you're depressed, you don't want to go, but
yeah.
turn up.
There's a great piece by all means Google it. I think someone might remind me in the chat, but it's done by a comedian about what's it like to organise a bunch of guys to go out in their 40s,
Yeah.
and it's exactly what you'd expect. As you'd expect, it's carnage and rings true for certainly for me. So yeah, excellent advice. Right, let's wrap up. You kindly gave us, I think you gave us predictions last year, including the silver one, early doors. I guess you're going to be a bit more tight-lipped this year. But have you got any, because you probably want to reveal this, I imagine, at the seminar you mentioned. But have you got any crazy stuff? What's the silver? Just tell me the one that's going to go up 120 odd %, and I'll be happy with that.
I've really wrestled with this year to get it down as to three is really difficult, and the most difficult one is always the last one. So
Right.
I that last one has rotated three times.
Right.
But in order to learn that, Tom,
Yeah.
you're going to have to come to my discovery day where I'm going to talk
Uh,
about volatility. I'm going to talk about what I think the property market has in store for us. I'm going to talk about three assets that I think are worth exploring without obviously giving financial advice or any
no.
recommendation. But to do that, you're going to have to join me at the discovery day on Friday, the 9th of January.
Straight back, true professional, getting nothing out of Paul. Other than quality and value as always. Thanks everyone for coming. Oh, if people want to get hold of you, you've already talked about that really, haven't you? Just find you on social media, Man with Beard, talking about surfing. There's only one.
Yeah, so I'm pretty easy to find. Obviously my name is Paul Lanfear, Lanfear. The branding is all identical, and man with beard, often surfing. And by all means, connect me then. Connect me to me there, and very happy. Yeah, please do that. Please do come to this Discovery Day if you possibly can. Please do come to a breakfast if you possibly can. Be lovely to see you all.
Thanks as always to Paul. Thanks to everyone who attended today, and for those listening to the podcast, watching on YouTube. A special thanks to Paul, and we'll catch you in the next one. Happy Christmas, everyone.